Okay, that's telling me we're being live streamed now. It's always good when we see the technology working. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I can see us live on Facebook now.
Brilliant. Oh, and some familiar faces joining now as well. Welcome, Tara, Linda. Nice to see you. We're just managing the waiting room to let people in. We're going Facebook Live as well, so just getting the technology slick. I do think it's interesting, 2 years on down the line with a pandemic, when we're used to being virtual and we're doing Facebook and Teams and Zoom, I am yet to see it really slick. You'd think we'd all be perfect at this by now, but it's all a work in progress. So
for those in the Zoom meeting, you won't appear on Facebook unless you speak. So we would like faces and people speaking, but if you're worried about your face popping up on Facebook, then just turn your video off if you want to unmute and speak to us.
Yeah, but it is lovely to see faces. So
yeah,
anybody who does want to pop their camera on, that's always nice, but no pressure for anybody. So we are recording as well. So we've done this through CJS, and they do a lot of sharing the videos through YouTube. A lot of people like to look at the videos afterwards, so that will be available after the event as well. So before we even start, before we even do any introductions, what I'm going to ask you to do is just take a moment, and I want you to have a think about what's going on with you right now. And a poll's going to appear asking you to just take a moment and stop and think about, what are my stress levels right now? So you may have come from any meeting or done anything today, but that's going to pop up now to ask you just to score your stress levels between 1 and 10. So if you can just answer that poll. Now, I guess if you're on Facebook Live, you're probably not getting to see that poll. I'm not technical enough to know how that works, but feel free to pop that into the chat if you want to do that as well. So let's see, we've got a few answers in, so more just coming. And I'm seeing quite a mix with that as well. So I think we're all just about there. Just admitting some more people as we go. So if you're just joining, we're just asking everybody just to take a moment as you arrive in the room to think about what your stress levels are just now. So thank you for those who have had the chance to do that. Let's have a look and see what actually that's showing for us right now. So you should be able to see there on your screen, we've got people here just now with stress levels from down at a 3 up to a stress level of 7. So quite a variety there around what we're feeling just now. And we do this because it's going to become clear through the session why we're asking you this as well, because it's so important for us to think about what's going on with just now and to have that awareness. And you've come from, whatever you've come from before this session is influencing what's happening for you just now. And this is something we really need to understand more about ourselves. So we've got some people that stress levels quite high. So let's just take a moment there and just stop and think about how we're feeling. I want you just to take a deep breath. Just put your feet flat on the floor, or if you're out walking, just enjoying what's happening around you, taking notice, and just breathe. Grounding yourself, finding your way in this room, being here together, so that all that you can think about just now is what we're going to be doing together for the next hour or so. And we don't do that enough. And what we want to look at as part of this holistic approach to leadership is being really aware of what we're feeling and the impact of our feelings in what we do. And what we've seen recently, there's so much research around the impact of our stress and well-being. And even recently, CIPD, who's the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, their latest report is showing that 79% of organisations that took part are actually saying that they have had stress-related absence in the past year. Now, we have had a pandemic as well as all the other things that we have in life. But isn't that interesting to think of the impact stress has on us? And we should stop and think about that, because a lot of the top causes of stress from this report says it's workload, but it's relationships and it's management styles. These are the causes of stress. And you've come along here today in the role of manager or leader, future leader, and recognising the stress that you feel, what's happening with you, not only impacts on you, but impacts on the people around you as well. So that's just to set the scene a little bit for you. But now we're really going to introduce who are Tori and I, why are we here, and why should you even want to be listening to us? So we'll see if that's worthwhile at the end or not. But to introduce myself, first of all, I'm Kathleen, and I have I've been working in learning and development for over 20 years now. I took redundancy from corporate world 2.5 years ago now. Where's that time gone? A lot of my background has been in the engineering world, but so much has been around people development, leadership development, which has been training and coaching, behavioural change, well-being, team development, all manner of different things. So when I went self-employed, my passion was about supporting and developing leaders and coaching them. So the great thing was Tori and I met nearly 2 years ago now, when we started our postgrad certificate training in coaching. And at that point, we just clicked, really. There was a common thread and common themes around what we wanted to do and what we wanted to take forward. And for me, my background was engineering and people development. And I met Tori, who was from a whole different world, and opened my eyes to things that I'd been blissfully ignorant of in relation to conservation, to climate, to environment. So I'm going to let Tori say a little bit more about that and how she managed to open my eyes a little bit to this world as well.
Thanks, Kathleen. So I've worked for a range of not-for-profits in project and programme management for around 13 years. And for the last 6 years of that, I was a conservation leader. I'm also a kinship conservation fellow, which is where I first came across adaptive leadership, which we'll be talking about very briefly today. It's a massive topic. We've picked kind of 2 big topics, but today's really just a taster and to sort of pique your interest. But I retrained as a coach a couple of years ago, as I really enjoyed the people development and the coaching aspects of my job. I was managing people all over the world in different time zones, whose first language wasn't necessarily English. And so I sort of naturally started to develop a bit of a coaching approach, and I just really loved it. So my mission now is to really help leaders avoid all of the pitfalls that I fell into, and for us to try and provide the support that I was missing in that space as a kind of a middle manager, sort of worked my way up from a technical role into management, and as I progressed up the organisation.
Yeah. And the interesting thing was, for me, my passion of leadership development, and I started to hear Tori talking about conservation, and I had seen leadership development happening where there was really, set programs of how we develop our leaders, and this is the approach we develop leaders in difficult organizations. But although my passion was leadership development, I've got really mixed views on what's worked with regards to developing our leaders and what hasn't. And dealing with day-to-day challenges. There's so much from that when Tori started talking to me about conservation, I thought, wow, this really is a whole different world, where what I see and my observations of this is, when you work in conservation, it's so much more than just a job or just a career. And hearing Tori's story and other examples of that, realizing that people who are working in conservation, it's really all consuming. You're immersed in this world where there's a passion to really, it's about a lifestyle, really, more than a career so often. So what I've seen from my industry over the past few years as well is realizing that leaders are burning out, and we are seeing leaders having to adapt to different changes. and it almost feels to be exaggerated and more inflamed in the world of conservation. And as I've learned more about conservation through Tori, it's like, okay, here's an area where I feel I can bring my experience along with Tori and look, how can we start to make some changes around leadership and looking at what's worked with leadership in the past before. And instead of these set programs of leaders, looking at how can we bring coaching in and use more of a coaching methodology to understand that we're building on experience and skills within that as well. So there's so many different leadership styles and approaches out there. And what we want to do is understand, so what does this mean in conservation? And something that a new approach to leadership was when I've heard Tori starting to talk about adaptive leadership. And I thought, oh, that sounds familiar, but what does it really mean? And it really rings true. So Tori, if you can start us off by sharing your thoughts on adaptive leadership and help us understand a little bit more of what that means for you.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. So as you kind of implied, there's many different leadership styles and preferences and models. And really, I see adaptive leadership as an approach, and it draws on many different styles and preferences. And I really like these quotes because I feel that these kind of can help us unpick it a little bit more. So adaptive leadership is the practice of mobilizing people to tackle tough challenges and thrive. And it's specifically about the change that enables the capacity to thrive. So in practice, this can look like challenging the status quo, raising a taboo issue, pointing out contradictions between what people say they value and what they actually value. And there's plenty of examples that spring to mind for me at the moment, just from the UK government, saying that they value a green economy and then continuing to invest in gas and oil. That's a real contradiction. And speaking truth to power, so telling authority what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. And all of this, as you can imagine, can really cause quite a lot of disequilibrium in the system. And that might look like protests or divides in the community. And sort of looking through this list, that the communities that spring to mind for me are really Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter, kind of in the forefront of the news right now. Now, adaptive leadership doesn't have to be about activism, but these groups certainly tick most of the points above. And adaptive leadership is really about trying to change the system from inside out. So you're in the system and you're trying to change that system that you're in. Obviously, like Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter and the work that they're doing is on quite a grand scale, but thinking on a sort of day-to-day basis, if you look within your organization, there might be things that you see just aren't quite right. So if your organization says, for example, that it values diversity and inclusion, but then when they reach out for support or surveys, they're always asking one particular part of the population or one demographic, that's really a contradiction in terms and something that you might feel you want to challenge.
So what is it, would you say, that makes this adaptive leadership approach work so well in conservation? It sounds like a really positive type of leadership in any industry. So why does it work well in conservation, Tori?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it works well or better than anywhere else, but I think it's an appropriate approach to take, because in conservation and environmentalism, there's just so many issues that we face that are adaptive challenges, such as climate change, species extinction, habitat destruction. And within conservation and sort of the environment sector, we're really looking to make long-term changes, and that requires adaptive solutions over long timescales as well, to really have an impact at the climate level or on a habitat level. That's going to take time, and that requires this sort of adaptive approach, so iterating, exploring, testing out, and to have that in mind when you're planning a project or a program or an intervention, whatever, sort of level you're working at, it's really important to have that in mind in order to have lasting and impactful change. So maybe I can provide a quick overview of the difference between adaptive and, on the other side, sort of technical challenges. So if we look at technical challenges first, they're pretty clear what the problem is. They're easy to identify. The solution is normally quick and straightforward, and it's usually solved by an authority. So if you think, like, within your own neighborhood, if there was a gas leak, you'd be able to identify that because probably you'd smell the gas. So the problem's kind of clear. There's a clear authority that would come and fix that. So you call the gas board, they come along, they dig a hole, they identify where the leak's coming from, and there's normally a fairly quick, clear, easy route to fixing that. Whereas if we look at adaptive challenges, the problem's a lot more complex. It's multifaceted, often persists after a series of technical fixes. It's difficult to identify, but often easy to deny. So some of these bigger challenges like climate change and Black Lives Matter or institutional racism, they're quite difficult to put your finger on what the problem is, but they're quite easy to deny that there's a problem. And in order to fix them, they require a change in values, behavior, and beliefs, which, as you can imagine, is quite tricky and it's quite slow work. And in order to come up with a solution that can tackle that sort of complex problem, you often need collaboration across many boundaries. So that could be generational, it could be cultural, could be geographical. Again, not to keep going back to climate change, but really that is a great example of a problem that persists across all of these boundaries and requires collaboration at international levels in order to tackle it. And this can be why it's so difficult to solve, because the effects are often seen over these large scales of time and space. So if we're thinking about the gas example, if, for example, there was a large storm, we've had lots of storms in the UK recently, and say that storm takes out not only the gas, but it takes out the power, affects the water supply, perhaps homes are flooded, maybe homes are destroyed. That's a lot more complex. There's not then a clear authority that can fix that problem. So in the first instance, you'd need the government to step in a sort of command and control manner to shift us back to an adaptive state, to a state where we can start implementing solutions again, so kind of stabilize the situation. And then we'd then need different communities and authorities to come in and mobilize other groups to clean up and restore that space. And sort of thinking more longer term, if you can identify the causes of that storm, whether it be, the flooding was caused due to floodgates breaking, or it's coming to changes within the climate, that's also an adaptive challenge, because that's kind of the next level up, like what's the problem, very complex. Does that make sense, Kathleen?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's looking at, I think it's making me think to back to my world and understanding even engineers, as we're looking at engineers moving to leadership roles, is that the technical challenge is something we can fix. So we give a challenge like that to an engineer and they'll find a solution to it. When you're looking for that engineer to look broader, to work with their colleagues in a wider scale, then that's where the challenge comes. And I know from the leadership development perspective, it's that shift from working in maybe what could be seen as a one-dimensional leadership role to this much broader. It sounds like it's adapting to, well, from this perspective, you're talking about adapting to governments and really different people around the world, which is a new area for me, but it sounds like there's similarities to that as well.
And I'd love to hear from the audience whether you've got any examples of technical or adaptive challenges that you're facing at the moment in your work. So I've put that table up, which kind of gives you an overview. Feel free to take a screenshot if you want to keep that for later as well. yeah, if you want to type in the chat and let us know what's coming up for you.
I wonder if there's a shift for somebody maybe who's new into a leadership role, that initially it's the technical challenge is the one, and it's how you grow as a leader. Because I know that's the focus that's for me being, which is why coaching's been the passion for me, because it is that way to help somebody grow into, to be able to adapt to so many environments. And even as you're saying there, Tori, something that maybe I've not thought about as much is people whose English is their second language. We make assumptions often, don't we? But we're looking to adapt across a wider range with that as well.
Yeah, anyone got any examples that they'd like to share?
There'll be an opportunity at the end as well, as you're pondering a little bit more with what we're talking about. So at the end, maybe if you can't think of anything straight away, then pop it in the chat as you think about it, or at the end we'll have a bit of an opportunity to share some of those as well. So there's so many things around that with regards to what we mean with technical and adaptive, and it is, I guess it is a new term for me, but that word of adapting is more and more important as we're looking at that. But I'm interested, Tori, around when you're looking at being an adaptive leader within the world of conservation, and climate is the obvious one, as you know. I'm doing, it's my most learning more and more about this and trying to up my own knowledge around this. But what's the biggest challenge in this environment to be an adaptive leader?
Yeah, so I've got just a couple of examples of other challenges that might help bring this to life for people, and then I'll move on to challenges. So we've already talked about climate change, but there's other things in there that could be adaptive challenges, like parenting. Unfortunately, there's no rule book or recipe that comes along when you have a child, so that's a fairly adaptive challenge, raising children. Looking at species protection and habitat protection, obviously an adaptive challenge compared to some of these other technical challenges. So baking a cake, fairly straightforward. You get a recipe, there's a procedure to follow, and if you follow it accurately, then hopefully you end up with a nice cake at the end. Broken bones, usually fairly straightforward. Doctor knows what to do, put you in a cast, should be fixed. And then, so thinking about challenges, Kathleen. So as you can imagine, I've talked quite a lot about Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter. These are quite difficult spaces to operate in. And if you're unprepared for the sort of confrontation and the conflict that you might experience in that space, it can be quite uncomfortable, both for you and for others, when you're sort of upsetting the status quo. So because of that disequilibrium in the system, that can be quite difficult, especially if you're in the middle of an organization. There's the potential for you to be viewed as a troublemaker. There's a lot of work to do around mobilizing people and bringing people on board, and that can often feel like an uphill battle, and things can become quite heated, and it's quite easy to become exhausted and disillusioned. And as you said at the start, like, there's a lot of burnout, and I think a lot of that is to do with these adaptive challenges that lots of people in this sector are facing. So it's really important to have a good support network, a good coach, and peers to discuss and share ideas with. And I didn't have these things in place when I was operating in this space, and so I ended up feeling a bit like a lemon that had lost all of its zest. So we can think about a lemon or an orange that's had all of its like juicy zests grated off it. I kind of end up with like a bit of a shriveled, pithy, sad lemon that sits in the corner. It wasn't that bad, but kind of feeling
feeling your pain, Tori. We're feeling your pain.
a bit vulnerable. You kind of lost your protection in your skin. And again, if you look at some of the groups that are operating in this space, you can see that they're really passionate, and it can become all-consuming. But if you don't have the right support network in place, and I'm looking at Linda here because I know that she's doing a lot of work in that space, you can end up in a not very good place. And I think within conservation, this can be quite tricky as well, when potentially the system that you're operating in is supporting and almost encouraging technical, like, quick wins. So a lot of funders, I mean, it's changing now, but a lot of funders are looking for sort of a quick, tangible outcome on a project versus a project that's making slower progress, but will actually have longer term and more meaningful impacts. I think it's often really hard to determine whether something is a technical or an adaptive challenge to start off with. So thinking of examples when things have gone wrong, and, you know, I can't get in their heads, so I don't know whether this was deliberate or not, but if you look at the problem that we've had with plastics and plastic packaging, originally corporations tried to push the problem with plastic packaging back onto the consumer, and this became a recycling problem, a technical fix. The technical fix was, well, if you do your recycling, then we won't have a plastic problem. But actually it required a change to the system, and that's kind of where we're moving to now, changing that system and recognizing that recycling definitely isn't going to fix that problem. So we're requiring people to change their values and their behaviors, and it's kind of largely led by us now, the stakeholders, trying to influence the solution by deciding what we buy, sort of influencing that demand. I think it's just so interesting, that shift.
It seems to me, when I hear you talking, Tori, around what leadership looks like in conservation, it's way more than leading a team. So a lot of the work I've done is about leading teams, but you're talking there about leading communities, leading conversations in groups in government. Incredible diversity in what leadership really means in conservation. And I think this is where my passion's coming from, around being able to support and develop people in this area, because we're talking about world critical situations. We're talking about things where we have to make change, and we're looking to people lead in this area who maybe haven't been given the skills before. I mean, you talked, Tori, before around the fact that, you know, you had to find your way with some of the things that you had to deal with. So about how do we help leaders do this? So leading across everything, is that your experience of leadership and conservation?
Yeah, and I think it will be the same in lots of other sectors as well. But certainly within conservation, I think you need to be really aware of the systems that you're working in and the context of those systems. So, you know, if you're looking at a project level, maybe if you want to, yeah, thank you. So you kind of got sort of you in the middle, if you like, and then you've got maybe your project team, the organization, the country, or the political system that you're operating in. And each of those levels will require different behavior and different leadership skills and styles. And I think it's really difficult and sort of it's difficult to take the time to step back and map out those systems and really think about where does your project or your work, it might not be a project, fit into the wider system? What influence do you have over those wider systems? Who are the stakeholders in each of those systems, and what are their drivers and needs? And I've done some great work with some leaders where we physically mapped out those systems using sort of wooden people or wooden blocks to represent the different components or people within the system. And that was really helpful, just to get everything out on the table, and then you can start to see who the gatekeepers are and what needs to shift and move forwards, and who needs to be influenced in what way to move the whole program or piece of work forwards.
So there's a lot of connections. It's building connections really with that as well, and really taking what you're saying is they're taking that time to stop and look and understand the systems that you're part of. And that's not often something that you can see easily yourself, and it's your support group, your network, and what we're looking to do with coaching to help people take that time to step back and understand what it is that's important for them at the moment, to be able to be these real inspirational leaders that we're seeing that are working in this space at the moment. And there are a lot of similarities from what you're saying around the different industries that I've worked in. More recently, I'm seeing, I've been doing work on leadership development from engineers to lawyers to accountants, people in care homes, managers of care homes, and that's been a really challenging world for them in the past year or so. And what I see is that line being more blurred between work and other aspects of the life more than ever. And one of the first things I said was what I'm seeing and observing is in the conservation world, in the environmental climate world, those lines are even more blurred than ever.
I think also as well, like, it's really important to recognize that you are part of the system and you don't come as a blank slate. So you really need to know how you're influencing it and how you can use your unique skills and strengths to influence it. So recently I worked with a senior conservation leader, and we just did a piece of work on her values and who she was as a leader, and that was life-changing for her, because suddenly she was aware of who she was, and she realized she didn't need to change, she just needed to embrace it and apply it correctly. But yeah, bringing that awareness of how you're influencing the system. So as I said, you're not a blank slate. And I love this picture of the peacock. So if you think of the peacock's feathers as all of the different systems that you've interacted with, and by system, I mean a collection of relationships. So this could be family, that's how you start, that's the first system you enter normally. Education, schools, local communities, they're all different systems of relationships. And when you enter this new system, so if it's a project or a piece of work, you're bringing all of that kind of history and influence that shaped you as you come in, and so you need to be really aware of that. Some of the obvious ones are sort of your cultural influences, if you're from a different background or you have different beliefs, all of that's kind of coming into the room with you and coming into your project. Yeah, so you really need to do that work on yourself and be able to decide and control who you are in that moment, because things can get quite tough, quite heated, potential for conflict, and being able to be sort of self-aware and self-regulate in that situation can be really important.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're becoming more and more aware of, aren't we? And I think it's understanding how we can make those changes and how we can look at problems in different ways in a world that is changing so rapidly. How we keep up with that when we're caught on this treadmill of life and media manipulation and all of those different things, is how do we step back and understand that? Because the world is literally burning around us, but we're seeing people burning out in all aspects here. So understanding, where is your head at just now? And have you really stopped to think about that? And as a leader, you have an incredible amount of influence on other people. And the impact of that, what I've seen more and more of is leaders are taking so much time to look after other people and look after what's around them and communities around them, that they're actually not stopping to look after themselves. And Tori's talking there about not being a blank slate. We've got skills, we've got experiences, but we're not stopping and looking at what those are to understand the part that we can play. And looking after yourself. Looking after yourself means that you can look after the world around you in a much more productive way. And that's really what I guess our passion is with conservation coaching, is bringing those different things together so that we're looking at leadership development really through the lens of well-being, So you're making sure that well-being is a part of everything you do. And that isn't something that comes naturally to a lot of leaders. And we're seeing that, as Tori's saying there, that stopping and having a look at what your values are. Well, actually, what does that mean? Do I fit within this world that I'm working in, and how can I bring those to life as well? What we're seeing more and more is burnout, and it's been really quite upsetting, I've found, seeing what's happening with people and leaders and the journey. And I think we all have either been there or know somebody who's been through this. And if you have a look at those different stages of burnout there, it's maybe interesting to think, have any of these things, has this been something you've been through? Can you relate to some of these and this journey through burnout? What can you do to stop yourself? So what we want to look at is looking at how can we put different tools and techniques in place for you to recognize where you are on this, so that you don't get to that last point of mental or physical collapse, because then you're not helping yourself and not helping the cause that you want to be a part of as well. And it influences everybody around you, isn't it? So understanding this is really the core of what we look at within conservation coaching, and realizing that when we're looking at what's a leader and what's a great leader, well, the difference there, which for me is loud and clear through all different industries around leadership, is emotional intelligence. And so what does that mean? Well, Tori talked there about having that awareness. So the first step of emotional intelligence is really being self-aware, is understanding what's going on with you right now. And I take you back to that very first question I asked you to fill in the poll and say, what's my stress level right now? That awareness is so important to understand what is going on with you, and learning about, well, what are your own emotional triggers? And do you know what your own strengths are? Do you know what impact you have on the people around you? And being able to stop and recognize this. And it's not always obvious. We maybe think we know what we're feeling at any one point, but then we're rushing on to do the next thing, or to do the next task, or to go to the next meeting. We're not really stopping and breathing. So as part of the coaching we do, it's giving you that mirror to have a look at yourself and say, how aware am I? What am I doing? What are my skills and my strengths? And useful for you to take a moment to think about what that means. And what is interesting is that we often think we're quite self-aware. I'm like, yeah, I know what I'm like. I know the impact I'm having on others. But when we look at the research that's been done through Daniel Goleman, who really was one of the initial developers of emotional intelligence, the research that he's done has shown that actually 95% of us think we're self-aware, but in reality, we're only 10 to 15%. And that's where the leadership development is so important, because you need to take that time to really understand what's happening with you, and what you can do. So that self-awareness, once you're aware of once you're aware of what's happening with you, then you've got choice. You can understand where your stress levels are at, what your emotional triggers are, and what you can do to make some of the changes around that, and building in different techniques for that. And once you're understanding more about yourself, then it's the impact on your relationships with others. And in conservation, those relationships can be wide and varied, with different people from your team, your project, to government, to funding bodies, to different communities around the world. And we're all driven by different emotions and values. So how do you adapt to be able to then deal with these different people, to deal with these tough challenges, to help you thrive and to help the communities that you're working with thrive as well? So there's so much there. And really step one is starting to have a look at yourself and building that self-awareness, and asking yourself, asking for feedback, ask others how you're coming across. What do other people think your strengths are, what you're good at? And that can be quite brave sometimes, but to be able to take that step and ask, what am I doing well? What can I change? And we can bring in, as we do with our coaching and development, different things around mindfulness and understanding that where we are just now. And compassion training and journaling can be really useful with that as well. And exploring and trying new things. I know from my self-awareness over the past couple of years, one of the ways I've built that has been really about talking to people about different things. When I realized that I was just not paying enough attention to what's happening in the world around me with regards to climate change, one of the things I started doing was following different people on Twitter, reading different articles, and often it's following people that I don't agree with. It's challenging my own thinking so that I can start to build that awareness about what makes me tick and what works as well. So important to think about that. And Tori, is there anything there from a conservation perspective that you think that where emotional intelligence does stand out, or where there is a need for it, maybe from what your experience is, or for some of the work you've done with some of your clients?
Good question. I think the sort of the stopping and reflecting and the mindfulness kind of all go hand in hand, and it's such a simple thing, but taking the time to do that, because I found that the sort of life and work became so intertwined, particularly if you're living and working somewhere that isn't your sort of original home. You're working in the field, things just become merged, and your social life and your work life are not really easy to distinguish anymore. So that time for reflection is really important.
Yeah, and a lot of people can be quite disciplined. Well, I'll say a lot of people, some people, I think maybe it's fairer, can be quite disciplined in taking that time to reflect. And I know I keep a gratitude journal, and that's something that's my reflection time. But the reason we're doing what we're doing is actually we want to be that sounding board. We want to be that one that gives the space and the time to help with the reflection, because it can be really, really challenging to do it yourself as well. So when you were in those difficult situations, Tori, what did you do to look after yourself? When you felt those pressures and that you talked about being a difficult space to be in.
None of the right things, I don't think. Lots of hindsight on what I could have done.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to hear more, Kathleen, about sort of self-management and emotional management. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
I think the self-management part does come from, a lot for me has been mindfulness, and it has been about that reflection and understanding how to become more self-aware. And I think step one is asking for advice, asking for feedback, asking other people. And my self-management is, I've got the canal right behind my house. For me, managing my emotions, when things get on top of me, I just get the trainers on and get out for a walk. I made it sound like I might run there. I never run, but a lovely walk along the canal when I can just enjoy that peace and just still. And again, being in nature for me, just absorbing that is a way to help manage my emotions. The self-talk, we're great at telling ourselves all these stories as well, building awareness of that sort of self-talk as well. And something that's worked a lot is that skills and strengths awareness piece too, to be able to build my own understanding of what I'm good at. It's not just about what I'm not so good at, it's celebrating the successes and celebrating the things that actually I am good at as well. And a lot of the work is about encouraging people to embrace the strengths. So it's not just about all the stuff that we need to be better at, because the strengths that we have are often what have taken us into the role that we're in anyway. So it's just about spending more time building that. And I think learning to be less judgmental of ourselves and others, that part around building compassion and understanding that we've all got stuff going on, and how can I use and understand my compassion for others. And I guess that's where the learning has come a lot for me about being more involved in this area too. There was a quote in that CIPD report that I read just last week, and it's something I've never read in any sort of CIPD literature before around leadership. And it said, we need leaders who show compassion, who actively foster a culture that engenders trust and kindness. And I can't tell you how excited I was to see a report coming from a body like this that talked about compassion and kindness. But how do we practice that? This is new for a lot of people. So it's how do we learn to build this in as leaders? And really, this is the future of leaders are not about command and control. It's about leading through compassion and kindness, and really building on that for us going forward as well.
And do you get a sense of how comfortable leaders are at embracing compassion? Or
there's a definite shift, and I'm loving this. And this is where actually, as awful as the pandemic has been, it has been, well, we could have a whole debate on that in itself, but what it's done is made people be, I've seen people who are being kinder, who are looking outwardly, whether it be people who felt they wanted to stand on the doorstep and clap for the NHS, or buy more money in the food bank for communities, or supporting different aspects like that. We've had people out finding woodland in their vicinity that they never even knew existed before, all of those sorts of things. So there's definitely a shift in something that I've discovered recently, looking at conscious leadership, our consciousness of what's happening within ourselves and the world around us. And the fact that we're seeing this, and I've got engineers asking me for mindfulness training. Who knew? That's a whole change. So we're starting to see that shift, and you can tell it excites me, because this is what we need more of in the world. And the fact that we're starting to see this, and leaders want this. Leaders are saying, help me. I know I need to be like this, and I want to, but I don't know how. And I guess that's back to what started our conversation initially, wasn't it, Tori, about we want to be part of this. We want to be part of this change, and how we can put our experience together to build on that going forward. So it's an exciting time, but the challenges are significant. So.
Just thinking, like we've talked about lots of quite intense sort of situations, I suppose. We've got the pandemic, we've got climate change, we've got the Black Lives Matter stuff going on. If someone's watching this and they're feeling like really stressed out, kind of at the end of their tether, if you like, they're not really sure what to do next, do you have any kind of top tips, Kathleen, that's helped you in the past, or you've seen to help other people kind of get out of
there's so much, isn't there? And we're talking a lot, and I've been doing a lot of training recently on building resilience. Well, it's become a bit of a mantra in some ways now. People are like, what does resilience actually mean? And I like this simple model that was developed, Charity Mind, with one of the government think tanks, which is now part of the NHS. And these are just little tips on things that we can do around well-being. Keep learning new things, keep learning so that you're always thinking about different things. Connecting, this is fundamental, and it's connecting with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us. And back to my eyes being opened from our conversations, Tori, with connecting with the world that I was just plodding along as a part of. So what does connection look like for you? And take notice is about, again, stopping what's happening with my feelings and my emotions just now. And that's my mindfulness route. And giving ourselves, and it's not just about money, it might be giving time, it might be giving a smile. Those things even are literally, that walking down the street in the middle of a pandemic when people are avoiding each other, and you'd get a smile from a stranger. That in itself, the uplifting feeling of that. So what is it that we can give? And I will just qualify that with what I've said earlier around, you've got to get balance. You can't give all of yourself, because that's what we're seeing. And being active, getting up and moving. Maybe you've been in an active role before, and now you're sitting like this, talking to everybody through a little square screen here. How can you bring movement in? So there's so many things around that, but that gives a bit of a flavour of what well-being looks like. And this is becoming integrated into our working lives. And so as a leader, it's what does well-being look like, and how do you integrate this into your team and your work, and for yourselves, making sure you look after yourself as well as putting these things in place for your team, which is where there have been a few hiccups, I think, recently.
I think that brings us nicely onto the next slide, which is an image that you found that I absolutely love.
Yeah, That's a lovely little picture, isn't it? There's, and it's with so many of us have heard of the when you're on an aeroplane and the air steward says to you, put your own gas mask on first before you help anybody else. I think we've heard that, and I think it's the same thing, isn't it? We have to look after ourselves to be able to look after our other people, our communities, the planet around us. We've got to make sure that we've got those reserves in place to manage that as well, haven't we?
Yeah, and I love this quote that I found. So yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. I think that change and that awareness has to start our home.
Yeah, absolutely. And by doing that, we're having an impact on all the world around us as well. So I can see we've got people starting to head off. We're getting to the end of that day now as well, haven't we? So
yeah, so we'd love you to just so we're just finalizing some suite of videos that would help leaders essentially, and we'd love a bit of crowdsourcing. So there's a poll just should come up on your screen now. It's just 3 questions. If you can just help us out by letting us know what you'd like to see more of, really. What would help you to be better at your job, to be happier, etc., etc.
Yeah, what we've done is, you can see we've got all this wealth of experience from different industries that we can say, yeah, this is all the stuff that we can see, but what we want to hear is from you, who are you're in the field, and what are the things that would really help you day to day. And we want conservation coaching to be responding to the needs of people in conservation, rather than just saying, here's a leadership approach. So we're evolving as we go with this as well. Yeah, I like your point there, Linda, with the watering can image. That is a nicer one than the oxygen mask, isn't it? So we're hoping you're filling some of the questions in there, or any comments. Thank you for those who have popped the comments in there. So if there's any other comments or any other questions, but we've got our details up on the screen there as well. So please do connect with us and keep in touch. Any thoughts after this, any questions that you have, any suggestions, any comments, things that you thought worked well here, any disagreements that you want to come back with, please do share any of those with us. Because that's what we really want to learn, and we want to be able to make a difference, and so let us know where we could do that. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, so I think we've got everybody. So yeah, thank you for coming along. It's really nice to see some friendly faces. Yeah, and see you again soon. But please, yeah, send your feedback and comments. And
thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.